well, in this case, David Martin says believed to be launched from submarines. General Buck Kernan has joined us here. General, the Tomahawk missile would be sea launched, correct?
It's correct. It can be sea or air launched. In all probability, as David said, these are from surface platforms. Could be subsurface like submarines, but they are definitely coming from the sea.
We're going to pick up David Chater, our correspondent with Sky News, who's helping to report for us in Baghdad. Let's pick him up.
I don't know if that's a hit anywhere or the fact they've set off one of their oil defense. But they're calm again across the city. For a while there, large flurry of activity, but I still haven't seen any large hit come in on the city itself.
David, we know from people who are just joining us here at Sky Centre, we heard air raid sirens above the city 90 minutes after President Bush's deadline, and then explosions you're telling us about some 10 minutes or so later, large pools of smoke, oil perhaps in the trenches that have been dug around the city having been set alight. Certainly we saw a tracer aircraft fire. We saw jets roaring overhead as well. You've been telling us about people who are taking for cover as quickly as possible. What else can you see, David?
Well, it's now calmed down. As I say, I've seen one large pool of smoke very much to the south of the picture. It's directly ahead of you. One or two cars, but the soldiers have taken cover. A few flashes again there, but the city now seems to have calmed down once again. Was it a nervous attack crew? What did they see? What did they hear? I've emphasized all along this could be just a nervous attack by the defenses. They are on edge. That siren went off, but I haven't seen anything land. Nothing land on the city skyline I'm watching. I don't know if you've seen any different from where you are. Some more tracer fire tingling in the sky up in the clouds above. A lot more activity. I can see these flashes going off in the sky, but I can't hear the reports.
David, we're expecting...
We're going to break away for just a moment from this coverage of David Chater live from Baghdad, who's not in a position to see a great deal. We'll try to keep the live picture up from Baghdad for you as we go through. But here's what we know. Air raid sirens went off in Baghdad. Was that noise in the city?
The President will address the nation at 10:15.
Well, that was short. The President of the United States will address the nation in about 15 minutes from now. That would be 10 o'clock Eastern time tonight. Live picture in Baghdad. We heard some thunderous explosions earlier. That would indicate the possibility that Tomahawk missiles, a cruise missile, or perhaps an additional one, have hit the city, but we do not know that for a fact. David Martin has reported. President Bush met with some of his principal military advisors earlier in the evening. It's believed in that meeting, and reliably reported, we believe to us, that the president was told there was a, quote, a target of opportunity to be hit in Baghdad. David described it as possibly a place where some high-ranking members were. That's speculative. Nobody knows, but a target of opportunity. Now, given the fact, General Buck Kernan, retired U.S. Army, that we believe Tomahawk missiles have been used, that would indicate that it is a fixed target, not a moving target.
That's correct, Dan. In all probability, this was one of many locations that had probably been identified, command and control facilities, bunker, palaces, where they might have determined that the Iraqi chain of command may be. Those would have been pre-programmed in to the missiles and then on order launched.
Now, this is what the Tomahawk missile looks like when it's launched from submarines. These submarines would be in the Red Sea, General, that fired these missiles, we believe?
Could be in the Red Sea, could be in the Gulf, could have been from air platforms also, but in all probability, as David said, they probably are from the sea, either the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf.
Now, let me correct something. The President of the United States is now scheduled to speak at about 10:15 Eastern Time. This is an adjustment of what we said earlier, that the President is to speak at 10:15 Eastern Time. That would be not quite a half hour from now, to about 26, 27 minutes from now. The President will speak and may shed more light on what has happened. What we do know is that sirens sounded over Baghdad, anti-aircraft fires started. There are some reports of hearing aircraft, but keep in mind that sometimes people confuse the sound of aircraft with the sound of missiles. You say, well, how could they do that? Well, trust me, it's rather easy to do. We do not know what, if anything, has been hit. We do not know with what it has been hit, if it has indeed been hit. The belief is a fixed target, what's called a target of opportunity by David Martin, believed to have been perhaps a meeting of some kind. President Bush was told earlier this evening that there was a target of opportunity. He gave the go-ahead to strike it, and we believe that that's what's been in progress these last few minutes. Now, right now you can see it's breaking dawn in Baghdad, that in the night just before dawn, in fact, in that gray area between night and sunrise, in the morning twilight, there was apparently a calling card left in Baghdad. Something went boom in the night, just before sunrise. Now, David Martin reports that so far as can be determined, this is not, and I repeat, not the beginning of the main aerial campaign to be followed, the U.S. military hopes, by a land invasion. I want to emphasize that the best of our information indicates that is not the case. Let's go back to David Martin at the Pentagon as we continue to look at a live picture from Baghdad. David, let's go over, as we await the president's appearance at 10:15 Eastern Time, 9:15 in the Central Time Zone, that exactly what we know about what has happened and why it has happened. David?
Well, let's back up to late afternoon when I believe this whole sequence of events began. At around 4:30 this afternoon, the president convened a meeting in the Oval Office of his most senior national security advisors, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, the director of the CIA, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. At that meeting, apparently, they discussed some intelligence that presumably the CIA had come up with, which made them think they had a good fix on the location of some members of the Iraqi leadership. And in that course of that meeting, apparently, the president gave the order to launch a strike at whatever this building or bunker where these people were believed to be meeting was. That strike was almost certainly carried out by cruise missiles fired from either ships or submarines in the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf. The cruise missile, this current model of the cruise missile, is a satellite-guided weapon. It works off taking updates from global positioning satellites, and I'm sure this target was on the target list to begin with anyway, since they have all of the underground bunkers that they've identified, all of the intelligence and defense buildings identified and already programmed into the computers of the guidance systems of these cruise missiles. And within a very brief period of time, they launched this strike. It was hard to count the number of explosions that you could hear on the television screen. I would think it was somewhere between 5 and 10, but that's just a guess. And then that's it. No more. This was a one-time shot trying to get a target that had popped up and that they hoped to get. Now it's going to be some time, obviously, before we know, one, whether that intelligence was correct, and two, whether the missiles hit the target and got who they were after. But obviously, the coincidence of this happening, an hour and a half after the expiration of the deadline that President Bush had set for Saddam Hussein to go into exile, will not be missed on anyone. This is, as you said, a pretty good calling card that the president means it, that Saddam and his regime must go. But I hasten to add that were this the real thing, were this the start of the war, these explosions would be continuing now because they are going to launch literally hundreds of cruise missiles in the first 24 hours of the air war. When it begins, we think, in perhaps another 24 to 48 hours. And of course, we don't know what this will do to the schedule of the war. This may prompt Saddam to take some sort of preemptive action. This may convince Saddam that he cannot survive an American onslaught. We don't know what effect it's going to have, but it certainly eliminates any doubt, if there ever was any left, that George Bush is serious about getting rid of Saddam Hussein and his circle of power.
David, here's what we're going to do right now. We're going to back up some videotape, and as you point out, that the indication is this was a, quote, target of opportunity. President Bush authorized it to be hit, that this is not, insofar as anybody can determine, and about this we are reasonably sure. We always like to tell you, what we know, what we don't know, what we think we know. This is under the heading of what we think we know, is this is not the start of the main aerial bombardment campaign that will be a prelude to the main force invasion. That will come hours, perhaps days behind this tonight. As David Martin describes it, this is designed for a specific target, or perhaps targets in Baghdad. Right now we want to play the tape. Here's what happened. We were on the air live with it about 20 some odd minutes ago. Listen and watch. This was recorded in Baghdad. We were on the air live with it, and you can hear and see what we heard and saw at that time. Some seconds left in this videotape replay now. And that was pretty much it. The Good Morning Baghdad sent by President Bush. That lasted on the order of, what, maybe a minute and a half, possibly as much as 2 minutes. Now, Andy Clark, one of our CBS News reporters and producers, has called in from Italy and saying that the U.S. Armed Forces radio said that this is, quote, a target of opportunity, and that the target of opportunity was, as David Martin reported a short while ago, what was believed to be a meeting of the Iraqi leadership. It may be some time, maybe a long time, who knows, before anyone can say, first of all, whether what are believed to be these Tomahawk missiles actually hit their targets, a fixed target where, for some reason, the United States thought there was a meeting of the Iraqi leadership, and if they hit the targets, what damage was done. I want to point out that White House spokesman Ari Fleischer, when he announced that President Bush would be speaking to the American people in now about 19 minutes from now at 10:15 Eastern Time, Ari Fleischer said that the opening phases of the disarmament of Iraq are underway. I underscore the phrase opening phases because there's a widespread belief, David Martin, our Pentagon correspondent, underscores this, that this is not the opening of main aerial bombardment campaign, which will be a prelude to a major ground force invasion. That still is apparently sometime off, perhaps a day or two away. We simply do not know. I want to go to Bill Plant, one of our CBS News White House correspondents. Bill, what do you know? What do you hear?
Dan, we've known all evening that something was up because the White House folks never let this thing drop. They never called it an evening. It was quite obvious that the president was probably going to speak tonight, though we were never told that as such. And even though, Dan, it appears that the war has probably not officially begun or begun in earnest, as David pointed out, It's no surprise that Mr. Bush is coming to speak this evening, because he has been pressed repeatedly to tell the American people how much this war will cost in both lives and dollars. And his spokesman has said over and over again that the president will not once, but more than once, make the case to the American people for what he is about to do, the reasons he is doing it, and what it can be expected to cost. The White House today foreshadowed that just a little bit by reminding us for the first time that this will cost American lives. But we do expect to hear from the president, if not the specifics of what targets were struck, a justification for what he is doing, an explanation that this is now underway, that it will continue for some time, and that it will entail costs and sacrifices. Dan?
Bill Plant, live from the White House. Now, according to the Associated Press, which of course has eyewitnesses on the scene, as do we, and you heard our man in Baghdad through our Sky affiliation, David Chater, earlier described what was going on, but the movements of any reporters and the field of view of any reporters in Baghdad is extremely limited by the circumstances of where they are kept, if you will, and where they're allowed to go. But according to the Associated Press, no airplanes were visible in the skies over Baghdad as the air raid sirens blasted. Some yellow and white tracers from anti-aircraft fire were seen scattered about in the sky. And then a number of strong explosions went off in the city. That's what we replayed for you earlier. We had it on the air live, then we replayed it for you. Now, Associated Press says one explosion raised what they call a ball of fire toward the southern part of the capital. We do not know for sure what weapons were used in this attack, but the most reasonable analysis is that they were tomahawks fired probably from submarines or possibly ship-launched that were put on this target. Now, retired General Perry Smith is joining us here. General, put this in context and perspective for us, what we believe to be a hello, we're around, signature shot, but perhaps no more than that.
That's right, Dan, but I think it's important for us to kind of go through the phases of this war. There are 4 phases. Phase 1 is the decision to go to war, and that was taken 3 or 4 days ago. The second phase is the initial phase. The third phase is the decisive phase. And the fourth phase is the wrap-up or the reconstruction phase. We are now kind of between phase 1 and phase 2. As you correctly reported, this is not a major air attack. This is very different than we saw on the 16th of January, 1991. But it does allow us to send a signal, maybe take an opportunity, let everybody know that we're ready to go. But it is not we're not in phase 2 yet. That's clear to me.
I want to point out to our viewers and perhaps those who are just joining us, there has been an air attack of some kind in Baghdad, lasted about 2, maybe as long as 2.5 or 3 minutes. President Bush will be speaking to the American public about 13 minutes from now. We will, of course, carry that live from Washington. David Martin, our CBS News national security correspondent at the Pentagon, has reported that what's called a target of opportunity was picked up by U.S. intelligence. The president met with his military leaders in late afternoon, perhaps on into the evening. He gave the okay, the go-ahead for this attack. It came at sunrise Baghdad time. It's not lost on anyone that the attack began roughly an hour and a half, maybe a little less than that, after the passage of the deadline that President Bush had given to Saddam Hussein to either leave the country or face attack. I want to turn quickly to Buck Kernan, retired U.S. Army. General, give us your perspective in putting this in context. It does, for all the world, look like a one-shot, not literally one shot, but a one carefully calibrated attack, not necessarily the precursor to an immediate overall aerial bombardment, much less invasion.
I agree, Dan. Unquestionably, it's a rude wake-up call for Saddam Hussein and his leadership. I think it's going to give them pause to reflect on their vulnerability. There probably were a multitude of cruise missiles used. If the target was large enough, you'd want to make sure that you saturated that with sufficient munitions to get the kind of effect that you were looking for on that target. As David Martin said, we may get fortunate. This may cause a significant attitude change in Saddam Hussein and his leaders if we were fortunate enough to target effectively some of the senior Iraqi leadership.
What are the chances that there was also mixed in here a psychological dimension? That we would like to get Saddam Hussein up and moving around, would we not?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, this is going to cause them to really stop and look at to where they feel safe. We're going to create targets of opportunity as we service various targets throughout this campaign. So unquestionably, that will produce a psychological edge for us.
General Smith?
I think there's a point here that needs to be made. The 48-hour notice came to the point that we were very close to dawn, so it was not possible to run a full campaign at night the first night. But it was possible to do something very specific, very precise, in a very short period of time before dawn was set up. So I think this is not unexpected, but I agree with you. I think we're still probably 20 hours, 16 hours away, or maybe 48 hours away from a major air assault.
Let's go back to David Martin at the Pentagon. You see a live picture of Baghdad. Whatever was happening is over, all over now. We cannot say for certain it won't be something else. That's one reason we're leaving this picture up. And after we go to David Martin, and before the President speaks about 11 minutes from now, we'll try to rerun at least some of the video and audio tape to give you, again, the flavor of the attack while it was occurring. It went to about 2.5 and 3 minutes. There were some heavy booms in the night, and for a brief period, the blast of war was blowing in the ears of anyone in Baghdad. David Martin, live at the Pentagon.
Dan, the military has a term for this kind of attack. It's called decapitation. Cut off the head of the leadership. And decapitation is hard to do. Usually you try to do it by knocking out their communications because you can't count on killing individual people. But if the intelligence was really good enough this time so they knew where individual people were to a certainty that allowed you to put a weapon on it from several hundred miles away, that alone will have to give the leadership of Iraq pause, because that would indicate that our intelligence is very, very good. This is probably the toughest intelligence target. Look how long we've been looking for Osama bin Laden. And Saddam Hussein spares no effort in protecting himself. And the leadership all lives in that same paranoid atmosphere where you're always looking over your shoulder. So if we can track leadership at this remove, that would seem to say we have Baghdad pretty well wired. But of course, I'm assuming that the intelligence was good. Frequently, intelligence is wrong. You hit what you think is a legitimate target in downtown Belgrade, and it turns out to be the Chinese embassy. So these things can go wrong as easily as they can go right.
General Gernan?
I think that's an excellent point, and the fact that we targeted a specific target, the leadership in all probability, makes this personal. It's against the leadership of Saddam Hussein and not the Iraqi people.
Well, what we've had, very quickly, a target of opportunity, so-called. Perhaps a meeting of the Iraqi leadership was targeted. No doubt that part of the reason that this calling card, this signature was put on Baghdad at dawn. As you can see, the light is beginning to increase now that we have dawn in Baghdad. It's early Thursday morning there. That one of the purposes, unquestionably, was certainly to hit the target in hopes that that leadership meeting was there, but also to give Saddam Hussein perhaps a little case of the willies, to spook him a bit. Now, if the desire was to scare him out of his wits, you would see Baghdad lit up for hours. That, at least not yet, has been the purpose of the aerial bombardment. I want to now put the tape up again. This happened, this is going to be on videotape, where you will see and hear what happened in Baghdad just as dawn was breaking now, about maybe 40 minutes ago, maybe 40 or 50 minutes ago. I'm going to put it up and let you see and hear again. If you'd been in Baghdad, this is part of what you would have seen and heard. most of this noise at the end of this videotape sequence is anti-aircraft fire. The big explosions, or what I call the huge explosions, early on in that sequence are believed to have been hits on something by Tomahawk missiles. This is an extremely destructive missile. The belief of the U.S. military is that it's also an extremely accurate missile, and with its accuracy, quote, dramatically increased from the time of the last Gulf War. And honest people could differ about how accurate it was in the last war, but worldwide, the agreement is this is a pretty precision weapon, always noting that no weapon can be made completely precision. We're going to go to Mark Phillips in Kuwait in just a moment, but first let me pass along a government official says now that U.S. forces launched what is called, and you knew this was coming, a, quote, surgical, unquote, military strike tonight targeting Iraqi leaders near Baghdad. This official says intelligence indicated Iraqi leaders were in the area. The official declined to name the leaders and would not say whether the attack was successful. Of course, it generally takes a while to determine whether launched missiles actually hit their target, and if so, how precisely they hit them. That may take a while. General Kernan, interesting time. It's morning. Generally speaking, folks don't hold big meetings early in the morning.
That's correct. I mean, there's a possibility that they could have had a meeting in light of the fact that the 48-hour had just passed. But it is an interesting time. It could well have been an area where people were bivouacked. In other words, they had people staying there in an area where they thought they were safe, bunkered in, and there's a distinct possibility that if they had everybody in one of those facilities, they may have been able to target them.
I want to keep in mind that we're less than 5 minutes now from the time that President Bush is to speak to the United States and to the world. And in the meantime, General Perry Smith has something he wants to add. General?
Yeah, I think we ought to be careful here because it could be leadership of the military, it could be leadership of the party, it could be leadership of the intelligence community. It wouldn't necessarily mean that we had Saddam in our sights, but if we can kick down the support structure that holds Saddam in power, either in the party or in the military, the intelligence community, if we can kick that down, then that takes you to the tipping point. And when you get to the tipping point, the whole regime collapses. And then when we come in with all that overwhelming force, it's a lot easier for the military and other people to say, okay, the game's over, they've knocked out these major leadership pieces, and it's time to quit. So this could be the first step of the knocking down and the tipping point of the end of the regime of Saddam Hussein.
New information is available. And we've been saying that the most likely weapon used in hitting this target of opportunity, as it's called tonight, apparently a one-time only, for the time being anyway, hit. We're now told that a handful of cruise missiles, we don't know how many that is, a handful of cruise missiles, and it included using the F-117 stealth bombers. Now, that adds another dimension to this whole thing, does it not, General Smith?
Yes, indeed. Of course, the stealth fighter or the stealth fighter bomber was used a lot in the Gulf War. It was used in the Serbian War. It has been used in the Afghan War. It's a very good weapon. It has a 2,000-pound warhead that comes in at a different angle than a cruise missile, and as a result of that, can provide, in many ways, better damage and better targeting than the cruise missile. The combination of cruise missiles plus the 2,000-pound bombs, laser-guided bombs, very accurate, gives you a nice panoply of weaponry.
I want to make sure that people have clarity about these weapons. The missile is fired, and we think from a submarine or perhaps some surface naval vessel. We believe there's launched from submarines. It's a missile. It has its own guidance system. Now, the 117, a stealth bomber, it's vulnerable during the daylight hours, is it not?
That's correct.
Which would explain why they were eager to get in there before sunup.
That's right.
You don't normally fly the 117 when there's daylight, do you, General Kernan?
No, that's correct. We want to get back across friendly skies as quickly as possible.
Now, Dateline Baghdad, the main frequency of Iraqi state radio appeared to be taken over by the U.S. military as U.S. 117 stealth bombers and cruise missiles began hitting Baghdad just before dawn. According to a source, I'm not quite sure, this was an Iraqi announcer. He said, this is the day, no, an announcer said in Arabic, I'm wrong. They took over the frequency. Somehow they took over the Iraqi radio frequency, the main frequency, and an announcer speaking for the U.S. forces said, "This is the day we've been waiting for." He said in Arabic, shortly after the normal Iraqi broadcaster went off the air. Suddenly, within minutes of the U.S. airstrike starting, the announcer said Saddam Hussein's administration was under attack. Now, in addition to the 117 stealth bomber and the cruise missiles, there's a strong indication, at least in my mind, that this taking over the radio frequency may have something to do with the so-called EC-130E Commando Solo. It's a psychological operations broadcasting aircraft that can be used under these circumstances, right, General Cornett?
That's correct. It's a line-of-sight aircraft that can intercept both radio and television messages.
Now, in less than a minute, we believe that you're going to hear from the President of the United States, who will shed additional light on what has happened here over the last almost 1 hour now. Baghdad hit, the major explosions from the air, missiles and stealth bomber hits were heard for about 3 minutes' time. And CBS News has been on the air for almost an hour now. And one of the climatic moments will come up in about 20-25 seconds as we go live to the White House for President Bush's address to the nation. He'll be speaking from the Oval Office. He will be addressing the nation and, of course, in particular, the servicemen and women and the families of those servicemen and women.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign. More than 35 countries are giving crucial support, from the use of naval and air bases to help with intelligence and logistics to the deployment of combat units. Every nation in this coalition has chosen to bear the duty and share the honor of serving in our common defense. To all the men and women of the United States Armed Forces now in the Middle East, the peace of a troubled world and the hopes of an oppressed people now depend on you. That trust is well placed. The enemies you confront will come to know your skill and bravery. The people you liberate will witness the honorable and decent spirit of the American military. In this conflict, America faces an enemy who has no regard for conventions of war or rules of morality. Saddam Hussein has placed Iraqi troops and equipment in civilian areas, attempting to use innocent men, women, and children as shields for his own military, a final atrocity against his people. I want Americans and all the world to know that coalition forces will make every effort to spare innocent civilians from harm. A campaign on the harsh terrain of a nation as large as California could be longer and more difficult than some predict. And helping Iraqis achieve a united, stable, and free country will require our sustained commitment. We come to Iraq with respect for its citizens, for their great civilization, and for the religious faiths they practice. We have no ambition in Iraq except to remove a threat and restore control of that country to its own people. I know that the families of our military are praying that all those who serve will return safely and soon. Millions of Americans are praying with you for the safety of your loved ones and for the protection of the innocent. For your sacrifice, you have the gratitude and respect of the American people. And you can know that our forces will be coming home as soon as their work is done. Our nation enters this conflict reluctantly, yet our purpose is sure. The people of the United States and our friends and allies will not live at the mercy of an outlaw regime that threatens the peace with weapons of mass murder. We will meet that threat now with our Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, and Marines so that we do not have to meet it later with armies of firefighters and police and doctors on the streets of our cities. Now that conflict has come, the only way to limit its duration is to apply decisive force. And I assure you, this will not be a campaign of half measures, and we will accept no outcome but victory. My fellow citizens, the dangers to our country and the world will be overcome. We will pass through this time of peril and carry on the work of peace. We will defend our freedom. We will bring freedom to others, and we will prevail. May God bless our country and all who defend her.
President Bush speaking live from the White House after a U.S. air attack believed to be carried out by Tomahawk cruise missiles and F-117 stealth bombers, a short and it was hoped precise attack on what is believed to have been some place where parts of the Iraqi leadership, did it include Saddam Hussein in the intelligence report? We simply don't know. You heard it, but let's underscore and italicize one thing that President Bush said, and that is that the war in Iraq could be longer and more difficult than some predict. The President said the U.S. and its allies will make every effort to spare the lives of innocent civilians. We go to the Pentagon and CBS National Security Correspondent David Martin. David?
Dan, one other thing the President said is that this will not be a campaign of half measures. Well, if what we saw tonight were all there were, it would be a campaign of half measures. Those are the kinds of strikes that the U.S. used to launch against Iraq during the 12 years between the end of the first Gulf War and now up to the eve of what's going to be the second Gulf War. There was the famous strike that President Clinton ordered in retaliation for the plot to assassinate George Bush's father on a visit to Kuwait, and that was a strike using cruise missiles against the headquarters of the Iraqi intelligence service. So this is like that. This kind of one-time shot, perhaps not of revenge, but going after a target of opportunity. And it would only be a half measure if that were all there were to it, but I think it's probably only the beginning of a very substantial air campaign followed by a very substantial ground campaign.
David, I want to let you go so you can catch that phone. I'm afraid some source is calling you and you'll miss it, so I'll let you go and we'll get back to you.
Go on now.
Let's pause and absorb this fact, which is a fact. How different from the 1991 start of the war from now. The last one started with the now famous light and sound show, infamous to some, famous to those who were pulling for the United States and coalition forces. This one starts with what the military hopes is a precision strike, a, quote, surgical strike against what is believed to have been a place where the leadership of Saddam Hussein's party was meeting. This strike to demonstrate the very different goals in 2003 from the 1991 start of the war. At that time, let us remember, the purpose of the Gulf War was to expel Saddam Hussein and his forces from Kuwait. That is not the case with this war that has started, however you want to cut it. This is the start of the war. It may be hours or days before the main aerial campaign starts, followed by an invasion, but by any reasonable analysis, this is the start of the war. Now, the objectives this time are much broader and much more difficult to accomplish, and no one should be mistaken about that, as President Bush tried to make clear. The objectives this time are to disarm Iraq, free the Iraqi people, and, as President Bush has said, save the world from danger, and to crush, completely decapitate the regime of Saddam Hussein, which has been described the world over as a regime built along the lines of what Joseph Stalin did in the Soviet Union in the 30s, 40s, and into the 50s. Saddam Hussein being a close student of Stalin, as he's told many people, including this reporter, over the years. And so it's a much more difficult war to conduct this time, and I don't think it can be emphasized or overemphasized to point that out, as President Bush began laying the groundwork for that tonight by saying, in effect, yes, there's a lot of talk of this being a short war, and my words, not his, let us all hope and pray it is, but we should not kid ourselves. It may be longer, the President said, in effect, than some people estimate. We're going to go now to, first of all, General Kernan, anything you want to add? You've had a chance now to think about the attack, how short it was. We now know it included not only the Tomahawk missiles, but also the F-117 stealth bombers.
Well, I think the important point to make and reemphasize is that it really was just a very surgical, precise strike against a single target. This is not by any means the start of the campaign. Well, it's sort of like the coin toss of a football game. This is just getting started. When they talk about shock and awe, you're talking about an integrated fight, a combined arms fight, integrating and massing the effects of your land, sea, and air systems simultaneously on a target. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty horrific, and they have yet to experience that yet.
General Perry Smith, retired Air Force General Smith, the effect on these U.S. troops who are poised, they are, as the military now uses the phrase, they're locked and cocked to go. What's the effect likely to be when they hear, see, and absorb what's happened tonight?
It's very positive because they now know it's not going to be, hurry up and wait. It's not going to be, oh, we're going to call it off at the last minute because Saddam leaves the country. They now know that the war is going to happen. We've already started. It's a very positive thing for them. They probably saw some of those cruise missiles go over them as the cruise missiles were headed into Baghdad. So they will be positively uplifted by this, and now they're even more ready to get it done, get it over, and get on home to their families.
All right, David Martin's on the phone. As soon as he puts that phone down, we want to go to him. This is a live shot of Baghdad as the dawn's early light begins to increase. The air attack is over. David Martin at the Pentagon has additional information. David.
Dan, here's some additional detail which I've just gotten over the phone. This was a bunker. It was not an office building, and it apparently was not a meeting. This was where senior leadership had gone to spend the night. And I asked how senior. The answer was very senior. And then I asked Saddam Hussein, and the answer was, I have nothing for you on that. So it may be, and I have no more evidence than what I just said, but it may be they thought they had Saddam himself in this attack, but obviously that's not something we'll know right away.
And it may be a long time before we can know so. We want to go to Mark Phillips, veteran CBS News correspondent who is in Kuwait, where, of course, the majority of the U.S. and British forces are based. Mark, how soon do you know about this attack? What's been the effect on the troops there?
Well, I was, in fact, just out with the troops several hours up until yesterday evening. There's a great deal of movement in the Kuwaiti desert to the west and to the north of Kuwait City, where I now am. Movement, I must say, most of that heading north as formations seem to be forming up and getting into tactical assembly positions from which to launch. I will say at the time, most of the people that we talked to, in fact, all of the people that we talked to, did not think that they would be moving in any imminent sense directly into Baghdad or into Iraq, but everybody was talking about being on the road by the weekend, as they put it. In Kuwait City here, historically, there is often a sense of events going on, of attacks being launched from this area, the sound of airplanes overhead, even of cruise missiles, sometimes being seen or heard in the past, in '91, in the subsequent attacks since that time as well. I have to tell you, it's a very quiet morning here, and none of the ordnance that appears to have been launched passed directly over here on its way into Baghdad. I can also tell you that there are very often situations in the Iraqi capital where I was during the last sustained bombings there in December of 1998, where the opening up of anti-aircraft fire seems to be the first thing that happens, and is not always an indication of any sense of imminent attack directly on the Iraqi capital. There are anti-aircraft installations, some of them very crude, some of them more sophisticated, spread all over the city, many in residential areas. That's the thing that we saw tonight, and the explosions that we heard on the tape appear to have been on the outskirts of town. Dan.
Mark Phillips reporting live from Kuwait as you look at live picture of Baghdad, where it's all over for at least the moment. And we go back live to David Martin at the Pentagon with additional information. David?
Dan, a little bit more about the tactics that were used in this strike. Apparently the cruise missiles went in first to sort of shatter the outer shell of this bunker, and then the F-117, which can carry a much heavier weapon, a 2,000-pound bunker-busting weapon, went in and dropped the bomb with a laser-guided designator down on the already shattered bunker, so part of the work was done for it, and it would be able to penetrate even much deeper. Now, any bunker that the leadership thought was safe enough to sleep in must have been very deep and very well fortified. So they had a lot of confidence in that bunker because they know bunkers are targets. And yet the U.S. had a lot of confidence in its ability to penetrate that bunker, and we'll see who was right. Either way, it couldn't have been very pleasant to have been in that bunker.
Well, David, picking up on that point, people may not understand this bunker buster is what the military would call, quote, a new and improved weapon. It is designed for targets apparently exactly like the one at which the U.S. military aimed this morning, which is a hardened target. We now believe it was not a meeting of some members of the top command that intelligence had indicated were there, that it was perhaps a place that they'd stayed overnight. Now, Retired General Perry Smith, let's talk about this bunker buster. It's designed for exactly this line of work, is it not?
That's correct, Dan, but I want to point out that the F-117 can carry the 2,000-pound bunker buster, but it cannot carry this bigger bunker buster. But the 2,000-pound bunker buster with a hardened case, which allows it to penetrate, can still do a very, very good job. So the graphic wasn't quite right, but the mission is the same, and that is to go deep, deep in. And sometimes you'll put one in, and then a minute or two later you'll put another in the same hole, which digs even deeper into the ground. So these are very effective, even though it's a 2,000-pounder, not a 5,000-pounder.
And General Kernan, we used these same kind of bunker busters in the Afghanistan campaign, correct?
Very effectively, we did.
To hit in caves.
That's correct.
All right. We want to play you now the most important part of what we saw and heard in Baghdad this morning. This happened, we're going to replay the videotape, where the attack was underway. Keep in mind, if you have a frame of reference of the beginning of the Gulf War in 1991, when Baghdad was lit up big time, you aren't going to see that this time. It's a different kind of attack. As we've said, this was specifically targeted somewhere where the U.S. military believed they had intelligence indicating that some members of the Iraqi leadership, Saddam Hussein, you can speculate if you like, but that's all it is, but they believe some high-ranking members were somewhere, they'd spent the night, and so they wanted to hit it. That's what this attack was about. Now, as the attack was happening about an hour and 10 minutes ago, just before daylight in Baghdad, this is what you would have seen and heard if you had been in Baghdad. We're going to roll the videotape now. Most of what you heard near the end there, anti-aircraft fire. The tremendous explosions at the beginning believed to be the Tomahawk cruise missiles. And then the explosions heard later, or believed to be, no way to confirm this yet, bunker buster, huge bombs, laser-guided bombs, dropped by F-117 stealth bombers, which came in behind the Tomahawk cruise missiles. Now, General Perry Smith, why would we not be continuing this aerial activity over Baghdad now as the daylight grows greater, and as we can see in the live picture, nothing is happening there now? Why not keep laying it on them?
That's the problem. In the daytime, when they still have a pretty darn good air defense system, you're not going to want to send in F-15s or F-16s or B-52s that could be shot down. You're probably going to have to wait until it gets dark again to bring in the stealth bombers and the stealth fighters who you don't want to use in the daytime, only at night, and you only have a limited number of cruise missiles, so you don't want to shoot thousands of them off and have none left for the next war we may have to fight.
Let's go to northern Iraq. CBS News correspondent Alan Pizzi is in the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk. Alan?
From Kirkuk, and I think a clear indication that this was, as you said, a very limited strike on Baghdad is the fact that nothing at all has happened up here. The oil fields around Kirkuk, of course, are a primary target. The U.S. military wants to get in there and make sure that Saddam doesn't set them on fire. The problem, as we know, is that the Turks did not allow the 4th Infantry Division to come through their territory, so there's no heavy U.S.
Well, unfortunately, the audio went bad on us there. As you could see, Alan Pizzi is not broadcasting from what you'd call your ordinary television studio. But the point he was making is that in northern Iraq, where the Kurdish population is fairly strong, keep in mind you have the Shiite Muslim population dominating in the southern and some eastern sections of Iraq. Then in the middle sections of the country, so to speak, and you have Sunni Muslims, of which Saddam Hussein is a member, and then up north you have the Kurds. So it's a big three-way split, and Alan Pizzi, we're going to try to go back to him now, is in that northern section around the Kurds. Alan, let's try to pick it up. You were making the point that it does indeed seem that this is a one-time strike, perhaps to be followed on later, but not at the moment.
Yes, as I said, nothing has happened here in the northern oil fields. They're about 20 miles from us, and that's a primary target of the U.S. military. They're going to have to take it probably with parachutes and an airborne assault because they couldn't get the 4th Infantry Division in through Turkey. So this area is going to be a major problem for them. And right now, nothing at all has happened up here. I guess we would expect to see cruise missiles and so on when it actually starts, because about 20 miles from where I'm standing, we know there's the Nebuchadnezzar Battalion of the Republican Guard, several armored units of the regular army. Now, some people are saying a lot of these regular army will surrender. The Kurds who rule the area that I'm in say they've had approaches already from senior officers in the Iraqi military saying, when it starts, we're going to give up. We'll see if they do, but the Republican Guard is expected to fight, so I think we can expect to see some fireworks around here, Dan, when it actually starts.
Alan Pizzi reporting live from Kirkuk in northern Iraq. Thanks, Alan. Let's do a little quick map talk now to put you in perspective, and there are some important points to make. First, we're going to put up a map of the Middle East, and General Kernan and General Smith, help me as we go through here. Iraq is up here, Baghdad roughly in this place. Now, the Tomahawk cruise missiles could have been launched from positions in the Red Sea. True. Correct?
Correct.
Is that the most likely place from which they would have been fired?
They're in the Persian Gulf in all probability.
Over here in the Persian Gulf and in the Red Sea. But you think these may have come from the Persian Gulf?
I can't tell, but they could have come from either one.
Either one of these. Now, keep in mind that these Tomahawk cruise missiles are fired from submarines or from surface ships. They also can be fired from aircraft.
That's correct.
But we believe that they may have come from the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf. I want to pause and say, frequently the first things you hear in situations such as this are wrong. And we may be wrong about some of the things we're passing along to you here. We can't do it with perfection. We give you our best analysis possible. Now, what's important about this map, if we can go back to it, is Alan Pizzi mentioned Turkey. The United States has been trying almost desperately, and I use the word measuredly, to get the Turks to at least allow overflights of their country for such things as missile attacks and aircraft attacks. As of right now, the U.S. military does not have permission to overfly Turkey. They also would like, or a bonus, if you will, to put the U.S. 4th Infantry Division up in Turkey, so when invasion time comes in expected 1, 2, maybe 3 days, we don't know, that it would come not only from Kuwait, where most of the U.S. forces are, but there would be a pincer move, if you will, coming through Turkey. Now, there's some hope that from Turkey, which has been round and round the mulberry bush on deciding whether it would allow anything, that there's some indication the Turks may tomorrow give permission for overflights. Here's the advantage of this, and as a matter of fact, General Colonel, talk it through. The advantage is, right now, that you can't fire missiles over Turkey, and you don't have overflight permission from Syria, Lebanon, or Jordan. You don't overfly Israel. So everything has to, whatever's fired, has to come either up through this direction or from over here in the Persian Gulf. It can't come from up north.
That's correct. And it lengthens significantly your axis of attack. If you could come directly out of the eastern Mediterranean across Turkey into those target locations in Iraq, it shortens the distance in which your fighters have to go. It also allows you to put tankers over Turkey, which further shortens that distance to the target area.
So the planes going in could refuel and stay over the target areas longer.
Exactly right. So they have longer in the target area, they can be much more precise, they have much more flexibility. You couple that with the ability to put ground forces in and now have the ability to base forces in Turkey, you can now even further reduce the time distance factor on moving the airplanes out of the target area, back to a base in Turkey, rearm, refuel, and go back to attack again.
We're going to go to Jim Axelrod, who's with the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division in Kuwait. He's on the phone from Kuwait's border with Iraq. I want to say to you that Jim Axelrod's report is subject to military review. Jim.
Dan, good morning from Kuwait. We are at a position, as you described, miles from the border with soldiers from the 3rd Infantry Division. This is key because these soldiers would be among the first troops, ground troops, to go into Iraq. And what we can tell you this morning is a camp that is anything but full of urgency right now. I'm watching soldiers right now get up, go about their morning routine. I'm looking at one soldier who's combing his hair in the mirror of his Humvee, another soldier doing his morning push-ups. The kind of activity we've seen for the last several days since we've been out in the desert position, the assembly areas and the tactical positions as they've been getting ready. The same kind of feel here. No urgency, no sense that anything has changed. Now, of course, that could all change in a heartbeat, obviously, were the orders to come down. But from what I'm seeing so far this morning, and again, it's just a little after 6:30 Kuwait time, we are seeing nothing that indicates any movement within the next hour or so from the camp. But again, that's about as much as detail as we can go into.
Jim Axelrod reporting live with the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division, poised at or near the Iraqi border in Kuwait. We know not exactly where. Now, let's review what happened tonight. There was an airstrike in Baghdad just before dawn, believed to be a combination of Tomahawk cruise missiles, followed on by F-111 stealth bombers, dropping so-called bunker busters. The target, called a target of opportunity by President Bush, targets of military opportunity, believed to be a place where some of the top Iraqi leadership perhaps had spent the night. Whether Saddam Hussein was included in the intelligence report saying that some high-ranking members of either the military or the Ba'ath Party are there, we simply do not know. Now, with that as background and bringing you up to date, let's go back to the Pentagon with David Martin, who has fresh details. David?
Dan, I think we can say the target was top leadership, possibly Saddam Hussein. What we have in additional detail now is that these cruise missiles were fired from ships in both the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. And in fact, one of the ships in the Red Sea was actually a submarine. They fired, I'm told, about 3 dozen cruise missiles, and then followed it up with the F-117. And when you think about that, that's pretty impressive. You have that many cruise missiles, 3 dozen cruise missiles, leaving from 2 different bodies of water, the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, arriving simultaneously at a bunker in the south of Baghdad, and then just seconds later, the F-117 arrives over target and drops its bomb right through all the rubble and broken concrete that has been created by the cruise missiles. So that's a very impressive piece of coordination, military coordination. And when you think about it, this strike probably took 5 or 6 hours to put together. If the meeting in the Oval Office started at 4:20, and that strike occurred, I think, about 9:30 or 9:45, that's about 5 hours to put that strike together, and that's another indication that they had gone there, the leadership, to spend the night, because that's an awful long time for most meetings to go on. So, and obviously, given the time of night that the strike occurred, it does seem that they had gone there in what they thought was a safe location. Even though the ultimatum had expired, they still thought it was safe to spend the night in this bunker. But then came these 36 cruise missiles. Now, you know, a lot's been made about the cost of this war. And the answer is, well, it's impossible to tell until we see how it goes. But you can add up the cost of 36 cruise missiles because they go at a little more than $1 million a copy. And then the 2,000-pound bomb isn't very expensive, but obviously the F-117 is. So what, conservative estimate, we just spent $50 million trying to get whoever was in that bunker.
David Martin at the Pentagon. David, our man in Baghdad, David Chater, reports that some of the trenches in Baghdad and around Baghdad that had been filled with oil, most of them are, it's my understanding, and based on a couple of recent trips to Baghdad, these trenches are mostly surrounding Baghdad. The report from our man in Baghdad is that some of these trenches with oil that surround Baghdad had been set on fire. Now, General Kernan, the purpose of that, it's a crude defense, but sometimes can be effective. Set that oil on fire and create great plumes of smoke.
It can mask our visibility of the city, but it's not effective against our precision munitions no longer. We can still penetrate that.
What you're looking at, thank you, General, in Baghdad is a live picture, if you will. It's after sunup now. Drive time in Baghdad, but given the events of the last hour and a half, hour 45 minutes, unlikely very many people will be driving around, because there were big things, made big noises in the night just before sunrise, those big things being Tomahawk cruise missiles. And we go to the map now, David Martin has confirmed that these Tomahawk cruise missiles were fired from both the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, coming in from both these directions, and at least some of them were fired from submarines. And then following on from the cruise missile attacks, almost immediately following, the F-117 stealth bombers came in with their laser-guided bunker busters to hit Baghdad in here. Now, General Kernan, these F-117 stealth bombers, without giving anything away on security, would they have flown from the United States or from someplace nearer the region?
No, they'd been inside the region, but it's important to point out, and David was addressing that, this was a very precise operation, very well integrated, with an awful lot of precision, not only in targeting the bunker complex itself, but choreographing the delivery of the cruise missiles to the bunker, followed immediately by the F-117. Not an easy drill, very, very well thought out, very precise, and of course, obviously well executed. Now we'll see the effects of it here within the next hours or days to come.
I want to emphasize that from all indications and the best available information, this was a signature airdrop of weaponry on a specific target. This was not the start of what some in the military call the big show, which is to say an overwhelming, awesome aerial campaign opening up, best guess, sometime in the next 24 to 48 hours, certainly by the end of Saturday night, are the most widespread predictions for that. But this was not the start of the big aerial campaign, which will be launched with some at least limited ground operations immediately, and to be followed on, if the plan holds, fairly quickly by a big ground invasion. That's not what this was about. Specific target, a so-called, quote, target of opportunity, where the U.S. intelligence led the military to believe that some high-ranking members of the Iraqi leadership were hanging out, perhaps had spent the night. So in come the cruise missiles, in come the F-17 stealth bombers dropping their bunker busters, which can go pretty deep and cause a lot of trouble with a capital T. It was all over in about 3 minutes or so. There were big explosions, some anti-aircraft fire, and then it was all quiet. And as you see Baghdad now, we put up the live picture. The light is increasing as the morning goes along in Baghdad, but there's been nothing in the way of big racket, big noise, certainly no big explosions for, well, coming up soon, about 2 hours. So that is the situation. Now, Dateline Kuwait City, U.S. and British forces have not yet received orders to launch a ground attack on Iraq, but are ready to go. This is according to a British military spokesman that he said on Thursday. That would be British time and also Baghdad time. It's already Thursday in Baghdad and also already Thursday in Britain. U.S. military spokesman Major David Anderson is quoted as saying that he could neither confirm any ground activity at the moment nor deny any. They're tight-lipped. Now, we're going to go to Tom Fenton in Qatar, or as some prefer to call it, Qatar. Both are correct, where the U.S. Central Command is located. Tom, what are you hearing? What do you know? What's important that we don't know?
Well, the most important thing right now is that General Tommy Franks, who is running this war, or will be running this war, is back here in Qatar this morning. He has been making a tour of his troops and a tour of the neighboring countries for the past few days. He was in Saudi Arabia yesterday. That was still today, your time. And he's now back here where he'll be running the war through the Joint Operations Center. Now, one of the things that I've been told here is that whatever the plan is for the war, you can be sure that the plan will change, that the very few plans survive the first contact with the enemy, as they say. And clearly, I don't think the kickoff was intended to be this target of opportunity. Another thing that I've been told is that the conduct of this war and the plan for this war will not be what you expect. That's as far as people will go when they talk about it. So there may be some surprises in store for us. Another thing of interest, you may remember we talked about the commando solo flights yesterday. This is an C-130 with a 10,000 watt. There's some planes going overhead right now. Military aircraft right now. There's a large airbase just near here. I think if I stop, you can hear them. These airplanes have been broadcasting a message for the last 3 months, trying to soften up, it's psychological warfare, PSYOPs, trying to soften up the Iraqis. I've now been told that they have switched their message, and for the first time, they are giving out specific instructions to Iraqi troops on what to do if they wish to surrender, how to walk away from their equipment, how to signal to coalition forces that they do not wish to fight. And this is something that the United States has waited to do until the invasion is actually imminent, so as not to tip off the plans, and so as not to give Iraqi minders, because they're minders with most of the troops, means of countering any attempt by the troops to surrender. So there's one other thing too. Apparently, they have taken over these commando solo flights. They have taken over regular Iraqi broadcasting frequencies. All of this is more evidence that the ground attack must be imminent. Dan?
Tom Fenton reporting from Qatar and the Persian Gulf. Now, we want to play you selected portions of what President Bush had to say to the nation tonight. Keep in mind, before the president spoke, White House spokesman Ari Fleischer underscored something that the leadership of the United States feels very important for people to understand, and that is, quote, Americans ought to be prepared for loss of life, which is to say, must be prepared for loss of life loss of the lives of our own fighting men and women, as well as those of the British and Australians who are gathering us, and the loss of life inside Iraq. Does it need to be said? War is cruel by definition, and there's no such thing as a no-risk war and a no-loss war. Now, while it begins on a note quite different from what happened in 1991, no question the war is underway. How soon the big aerial campaign followed by the big ground invasion comes, no one can say, but it is widely expected in the next 24 to 48 hours. Now, here is part of what President Bush had to say less than an hour ago.
I know that the family